Hello everyone. Today's topic is interrupts. In this, we will discuss about interrupts, types of interrupts, and its classification. Generally, the interrupts are classified into two categories, hardware and software. Further, hardware interrupts are classified into maskable and non-maskable interrupts. So we will discuss all these types. Introduction. The meaning of interrupt is to break the sequence of operation. Means interrupt is something which breaks the current execution sequence. While the microprocessor is executing a program, an interrupt breaks the normal sequence of the execution of instruction and diverts its execution to some other program called interrupt service routine. In short, it is called as ISR. We can say that like this is a program which is normally being executed. Suppose here an interrupt is generated. Now this interrupt will cause the execution of some other subroutine. It will disturb the normal execution of this program. Such scenario is known as interrupt. The processor can be interrupted in the following ways. One, by any external signal or by any internal signal that is generated by any special instruction or by any internal signal that is generated due to any condition which occurs while executing. Means if we suppose like there is a program in which there is an instruction A is equals to B divided by C. This is perfectly correct until unless C is equals to 0. So the third point states if such condition is there, only then an interrupt is generated. In 8086, only two interrupt signals are there. Two signals are there only. Pin number 17 and 18 in the 8086. Now the classification of interrupts. Interrupts are classified in two categories, hardware interrupt and software interrupt. The hardware interrupts are further classified into maskable interrupts and non-maskable interrupts, whereas software interrupts can be classified into different 256 categories. Now first of all, hardware interrupts. The interrupts which are initiated by any external hardware, if causes an interrupt, it will be categorized in the hardware interrupts. Means any hardware, X hardware is there which is connected with the microprocessor and it is generated any signal on the interrupt pin of the processor, then it will be called as an hardware interrupt. In 8086 microprocessor, we are taking the example of 8086 here. There are two interrupt pins, INTR and NMI. INTR is known as interrupt, whereas NMI stands for non-maskable interrupt. Okay, so if any interrupt initiated on INTR or NMI, it will be taken as an interrupt. These two pins are for hardware interrupts. Any interrupt generated on any of the pin will be considered as the hardware interrupt. Next is maskable and non-maskable interrupt. which are classified under hardware interrupts. Also, we are taking example here of 8086. The 8086 having maskable and non-maskable interrupt. Also, 8085 is also having maskable and non-maskable interrupts. Now, maskable interrupt. The 8086, the 8086 microprocessor having two interrupts on pin number 17 and 18. Pin number 18, which is INTR, this is known as the maskable interrupt. Meaning of maskable interrupt is which can be rejected or which can be paused for some time. That is maskable interrupt. Next is non-maskable interrupt. The NMI, pin number 17 is known as NMI. NMI stands for non-maskable interrupt. Means any signal generating on NMI will not be rejected and will not get paused. As the interrupt generated, it will get serviced once it is generated. Now, maskable interrupt is the interrupt which can be masked. Which can be masked means paused and re-enable them later. A programmer can pause them and re-enable them later. Non-maskable interrupts are those interrupts which cannot be controlled by the programmer. A programmer cannot control the non-maskable interrupts. The processor has to stop the main program and to execute the NMI service routine. Means this is the highest priority signal. Once this signal get high or generated, now at that time processor has to stop the main program and processor has to execute the NMI service routine. Maskable and non-maskable interrupts in detail. The processor has facility for accepting or rejecting the hardware interrupts. If it is rejecting any hardware interrupt, then it is a non-maskable. Sorry, it is a maskable. And if processor is always accepting the interrupt, that means the interrupt is non-maskable interrupt because it cannot be wait. Programming the processor to reject an interrupt is referred to as masking, and to accept is referred as unmasking or non-masking. The interrupt whose request can be either accepted or rejected. Accepted or rejected. Here rejected word is there, so it means we are talking about maskable interrupts. Another is interrupts whose request has to be definitely accepted, means cannot be rejected by the processor, are called as non-maskable interrupts, the highest priority interrupts. Causes of hardware interrupts. See here, few hardwares are denoted which can cause any interrupt, like keyboard, mouse, hard drive, floppy drive and DVD drive. These may cause interrupt to the processor. Next is software interrupts. Now these are the interrupts which are generated by any program instruction, like we have just discussed A is equals to B upon C. Such scenario causes software interrupts. These instructions are inserted at desired locations in the program. Another we can discuss about jump, call, halt. These are also software interrupts. While running a program, if software interrupt instruction is encountered, then the processor initiates an interrupt. Means if such condition is there, then processor initiates the interrupt by its own. It means We have only special kind of instructions that are act as interrupts to the processor. In 8086 microprocessor, we have 256 types of software interrupts, and it is denoted by INTN, where INT stands for interrupt and N stands for the number of the interrupt, which is in the range of 0 to 255. Now, what is then a software interrupt? It is used by operating systems to provide hooks into various functions. Means software interrupt is used by operating system. Another, it is used as a communication mechanism between different parts of the system. A to B, if A and B are the two different applications of a system, then they both can communicate using software interrupts. Here is the references. Thank you everyone.